Welcome to our ACRAA webinar for May 19, 2022. This is part of our service to our membership to bring you presentations on topics of current interest to all of us who are credit rating agencies. For this afternoon, we focus on two topics. One is on renewable energy as part of a subset of the broad topic of infrastructure projects. And the second topic is on healthcare systems. And we are most fortunate and we are thankful to CareEdge for contributing our most distinguished resource persons and speakers this afternoon. I shall introduce them one by one. But we shall start our webinar with renewable energy. We all know that climate change risks are dominating the priority agenda of governments and countries, and as well of businesses and financial markets. So we are naturally drawn to scrutinize the alternatives to fossil fuel, which is the major culprit in the production of greenhouse gases that accelerate global warming and the adversities and risks of climate change. We look to renewable energy, or RE, as the answer to our climate change predicament. But it's not as simple as making that assertion. Our speaker will help us understand the promise of renewable energy, its real potential, how fast that potential can be realized, the challenges and obstacles along the way. Well, in a manner of speaking, we are asking, what's the real score? So may I introduce to you Mr. Jatin Arya, who will be our resource speaker for this topic. He is Associate Director at CaseEdge Ratings and has strong exposure to the power sector value chain, specializing in the renewable energy sector. Before CareEdge, he was Assistant Vice President at ACRAA, also in India, and has more than 10 years of credit rating experience. His education includes a bachelor degree in business studies from University of New Delhi and master's in European business from ESCP Europe and PGDM from Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. So he is our most qualified, friendly resource speaker for this afternoon. Let us all welcome Mr. Jatin Arya. Jatin, please take over.
Right. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for the nice introduction, Santi.
Thank you.
Right. So I'd like to share my screen. I've made a presentation on renewable energy. So I hope it's visible to all.
That's nice. We can see it.
Fair enough. So the topic for today's discussion is infrastructure project evaluation, and I would primarily focus on the renewable energy segment. So I've broken my presentation into 5 parts. First of all, I'll give a brief outline over the RE scenario from a global perspective. Then, as we are an Indian credit rating agency and we primarily monitor the Indian market, I would speak about the scenario in Indian context. Then CARE is one of the leading credit rating agencies and has amongst the highest exposure in the RE domain. So in India, so we would speak about the methodology that we deploy while assessing credits in this sector. And then I would speak about the broad trends that have taken shape over the past few years, followed by the outlook for the renewable energy industry. Moving on to the first section, that is the global scenario. So the global RE capacity, if one looks at the graph on the left, is somewhere around 3064 gigawatt as on calendar year 2021 end, and has displayed CAGRs of roughly 9% over the last 5 years. China has been at the forefront of global installations, accounting for roughly 30% of the global installations, followed by USA, Brazil, India, Germany, and Japan. In terms of the growth rates, the CAGR for China has been better than the global average of 9%. China has been growing at a larger scale at 14%, and it has a wider base as well. Followed by India. India has also committed to reducing carbon emissions and increasing the footprint of renewable energy, and has been growing somewhere around 10%. On the graph on my right, the more prevalent technologies in renewable these days include wind and solar generation. So highlighted in red, I mean, there's only a very small red, is Denmark. In Denmark, more than 50% of their energy generation is from the renewable sources. In renewable, I'm only accounting wind and solar over here, not hydro, because hydro has longer gestation periods. In Asian context, if you see, most of the countries are light and dark green. Only China and Japan account for more than 10% of their annual generation from wind and solar sources. China is basically a very industrial country. So despite its large base, the share of RE continues to be limited. In the Indian context, wind and solar only comprise 8% of our annual generation. So going forward, this basically gives us a roadmap that there is immense scope of RE, and most of it is expected to come from Asian countries as well as the African subcontinent, wherein the resource availability is pretty decent. Moving on to how the RE installations have moved over the last 5 years. So the solar power sector has been the major driver of capacity addition. Its contribution has increased from 15% as on CY16 end to 28% as on CY21 end. Whereas wind segment has also increased from 23% to 27%, but bulk of the growth has come from the solar segment. Highlighting this further, if one looks at the year-on-year growth in the RE capacity, it has actually been a very consistent increase. Every year, if one refers to the graph on the right, it has actually remained range bound between 8 to 10%. And the 5-year CAGRs, if one looks at, for the solar segment, it's somewhere around 23%, and the wind segment, it's around 12%. In the hydro segment, the growth has rather been muted at 2% odd. So the shorter gestation periods for these new energy sources have actually complemented their capacity addition. Moving on to the Indian context, how things have actually moved in India. So in India, again, the story has been more protruded, with solar taking the bulk of the capacity additions that have taken place in the last 5 years. So the Indian RE sector has actually demonstrated a CAGR of 10%, as I spoke previously, and our installed capacity has increased from 90 gigawatt to 147 gigawatt as on CY21 end. Furthermore, as on March 22 end, the capacity stood at 154 gigawatt. So the pace of installations continues to be on the rise. And the trend has been similar. Solar segment, whose share has increased by more than 3 times. If one looks at its share, has increased from 11% in as on CY16 end to 34% as on CY21 end. The country has immense potential, as most of the geographic plane receives very good irrigation, and we have more than 300 sunny days in most of the geographies. This apart, what has complemented the growth of the solar story has been the consistent decline in module prices. In the early 2010s, the module prices were somewhere close to $2.7 per watt, and they touched a low of close to 20 cents per watt. However, there has been some increase in the module prices, but the competitiveness continues to remain intact. Moreover, what has further complemented the growth of the RE sector has been the superior cost competitiveness, the benign interest rates globally, as well as strong interest from the investor community, which has continued to provide the growth capital which has been necessary. However, one needs to see that wind sector has not grown at the pace it was expected to in India. It has primarily been plagued by challenges with respect to transmission availability, with respect to land, as well as the poor health of the Indian domestic wind manufacturers. Moving on to the RE capacity additions, in CY 2021, the installations were somewhere close to 13 gigawatt, and there has basically been an uptake from 6 odd gigawatts in CY 20, which was a COVID year, and the pace of execution was thwarted in that year. Going forward, we envisage close to 15 to 18 gigawatt of capacity additions in the renewable energy space over the next 3 years. And also, if one looks at the perspective, the growth story that India has shown, the installed capacity for wind and solar was only 20 gigawatt as on CY 13 end, and it stood at 90 gigawatt as on CY 21 end. So roughly, the CAGR translates to 20% for both these technologies. Moving forward, the growth, however, in the Indian context has been concentrated in a couple of regions. And I primarily wanted to focus on the southern part of the country as well as the western part of the country. Basically, India has a very long coastline, and that is why there has been immense potential for wind sector, as well as good irrigation in these areas. And these states have been the ones which have been at the forefront of receiving investments from international players, as well as capacity is being set up. Apart from this, the transmission, which is a major bottleneck for the transmission, India plans to set up a green energy corridor, first phase of which is expected to become operational by this calendar year's end, and that would basically help us in transmission evacuating somewhere around 20 to 24 gigawatt additional RE. Moving on to the rating methodology, the third section, while assessing a SPV, most of the capacity installations basically in the renewable energy sector happens in a special purpose vehicles. So corporates primarily create a special purpose vehicle for every project, and I have tried to highlight the parameters on which we actually assess those. So broadly, there are 3 parameters on which we assess a SPV. These include the business risk, the financial risk, as well as the management and parentage. I would cover all these three parameters in much more detail. Coming on to the business risk. So highlighted on this slide are the first 4 business risks as per CARE's methodology. So the first risk that we see is pertaining to the permitting risk. Now, the first few risks are prevalent maybe for an under construction project, and once a project becomes operational, these risks seem to get mitigated, and then we have the risks that I would speak further about in my subsequent slides. So coming on to the permitting risk, permitting primarily it refers to a company's ability to secure all the statutory clearances required for operating a RE project. This could be related to acquisition of land, taking that approval, getting the approval for the transmission infrastructure, getting the approval for a long-term open access to supply power through the designated transmission system, as well as getting the other statutory and legal clearances. These clearances keep on changing. For example, the trend that we've been witnessing is that the size of the wind turbines has been on the rise. So in India, for all subsequent wind projects, we need to take the Defense Ministry's approval to set up a project because we are covering some part of the airspace. And that is why it has been mandated as a necessary approval. So there continues to be a change in this aspect. Apart from it, in the Indian context, there are a lot of renewable energy parks that are being set up. In these renewable energy parks, the risks pertaining to the permitting parameter are taken care by the implementation agency. So the developers are actually assured to a certain extent. However, the charges are obviously inbuilt, and that does impact their project returns. Going forward, onto the second risk is the construction risk. So this primarily refers to the challenges associated with the physical construction of the project, which may result in a delay in execution. A delay in project implementation can actually lead to time and cost overrun, and it can impact the project returns. While evaluating a project, CareEdge primarily assesses the project progress in terms of construction. It evaluates the underlying EPC and equipment contracts, the strength of the parties offering those contracts, the extent of penalties that are there in case there is a delay. Is the project developer covered, as well as the liquidated damages in case of a delay, and what impact could it have on the project balance sheet? Moving on to the third type of risk, which is the funding risk. While evaluating the funding risk, CareEdge focuses on the ability of the company to tie up the requisite finances, the status of the funding tie-up, the capital structure mix while evaluating the project. Generally, all the infrastructure projects are capital intensive in nature, and the typical debt to equity ratio is somewhere around 70 to 75%. Debt comprises roughly around 70 to 75% of the overall cost. CareEdge evaluates the actual funding tie-up apart from the likelihood, assessing the likelihood of balance funding tie-up being available in time, so that project is not delayed due to the lack of funds. Even though project finance, this is generally a non-recourse in nature, the strength of the ultimate sponsor is an important risk mitigation factor, as it imparts financial flexibility in terms of funding any cost overrun that may happen while building the project. Now, just to give some practical examples in terms of permitting and all these risks. So one risk that we have seen globally is also that in USA, there have been a lot of eagles that have been killed because of the transmission infrastructure as well as the wind turbines. As well as the wind turbines. So the US regulator has also introduced penalties which were not envisaged earlier. Similar has been a ruling in India wherein Great Indian Bustard, which is a very, it's on the verge of extinction. Only 150 Great Indian Bustards are left right now, and they're primarily in the western part of the country, and they also die because of colliding with the transmission infrastructure. So all these, the Indian regulator has also mandated setting up of bird diverters and ensuring that transmission network is made underground wherever possible. However, this adds to the project cost for the developers. So one continues to monitor all these regulatory developments and its impact on the project. Moving forward to the next risk parameter, that is the nature and term of the PPA. PPA is basically a power purchase agreement. So basically, a power purchase agreement binds a buyer and a seller for a particular time frame, and as per the terms of the PPA, the power would be supplied and the settlement would happen at the designated tariff. So while assessing the nature and terms of PPA, CARE evaluates the status of the PPA tie-up, its provisions such as the tenor, it's the tariff that is applicable, whether there is a compulsory take or pay obligation, whether there is any payment security mechanism present in the power purchase agreement, whether there are certain clauses with respect to compensation in case the grid is not available and which is not under the purview of the developer, and what could be the termination payments, for example, if the off-taker in the middle of the term reneges from the contract. So generally, PPAs have a designated cash flow waterfall mechanism and which ensures ring fencing of proceeds, and CareEdge continues to run its sensitivities to ascertain the impact of any broader sensitivity on the project cash flows. Apart from this, CareEdge also looks at the counterparty credit risk. So counterparties primarily mean the off-takers who are procuring the power from the renewable energy project. In the Indian context, distribution segment is the weakest, and it primarily comprises of state distribution companies, which have often delayed in making the payments to the generators, which has caused some liquidity stress in the system. However, over the last 6 to 7 years, the government of India has also introduced central intermediaries in the form of NTPC as well as SECI, which have better credit profile and tried to mitigate that risk. Thus far, the payments from these central counterparties continue to remain on time, which actually aids the projects, and that acts as a credit strength for the projects. So while assessing a counterparty, CareEdge evaluates the financial position of the counterparty, its credit profile, what has been its track record with respect to making the payments, as well as whether there is any payment security mechanism, maybe in the form of letter of credit present in the power purchase agreement. Moving on, we also focus on the operating and the climatic related risk. As renewable energy is intermittent in nature and it primarily depends on the forces of nature, to fully hedge this risk is very difficult. However, CareEdge relies on the studies that are conducted by the developers as well as independent agencies to ascertain what could be the potential of a particular site and compares the actual generation vis-a-vis the promised or the envisaged generation. While analyzing the operating risk, we primarily focus on the actual generation vis-a-vis the envisaged generation. Apart from it, we also look at the plant availability and the grid availability, with plant availability being a factor of the equipment that has been installed as well as the O&M practices, whereas grid availability is essentially in the hands, not in the hands of developer, but it can impact the revenue profile of a project, and thus adds to the operating risk of a project. Furthermore, in case in a particular SPV there are more than one projects and there is diversification in terms of location, CareEdge factors in that diversification benefit, which helps in the credit rating profile. Moving forward to the last kind of a business risk, which pertains to the regulatory risk, which continues to be very prominent in the Indian context. As power is a concurrent subject, which means both central and state governments are free to make law of land on the subjects which are in the concurrent list. So both the states as well as center make their own policies, and at times there can be a disconnect, even though in case of any conflict, the law made by the central government prevails. However, there have been various instances in India wherein there have been delays in terms of making payments, there have been delays in terms of determining the tariff of a project, imposing some additional surcharges, etc. And this has actually made projects land into legal and regulatory proceedings, which has been a very time-consuming process and impacted the liquidity. So while assessing a project, CARE evaluates how exposed a project is to such regulatory risk while determining the credit profile. Moving forward to the financial risk, which is the second broad pillar while we evaluate renewable energy projects. This primarily comprises of five sub-pillars. First of all, while assessing a project, CareEdge looks at the adequacy of the cash flows. Since the prime objective of a rating exercise is to assess the adequacy of a company's debt servicing capability. We have to assess the cash flows and its relationship with the quantum of debt that has to be serviced. So Care Edge primarily draws various scenarios, and it draws projections for the tenor of the power purchase agreement or the debt tenor to understand the capability of the project and the cushion that it has. The cash flows are drawn considering the applicable tariff, the expected PLF, as well as the envisaged cost metrics in terms of operating costs, as well as the interest cost to determine the company's debt servicing ability. The cash flows are further sensitized to gauge the degree of cushion available in a particular project. Moving on to the leverage and the coverage indicators, as infra projects are again capital intensive in nature, the reliance on external debt is extremely very high. So Care Edge compares the capital cost of various projects which have been set up at a similar point in time to understand whether they have been set up at the right cost, evaluates its funding, the funding pattern, basically the capital structure, which basically determines the interest cost for a project, and it assesses those projects with that of the peers to assess the competitive position. Generally, a conservative leverage is viewed favorably by a credit rating agency, as it reflects lower quantum of committed outflows, while a longer maturity profile and lower finance cost, a lower cost can offset risks associated with even a higher financial leverage. So Care evaluates all these aspects while determining the competitive landscape and the coverage profile. Moving forward, with respect to the working capital and liquidity, liquidity is basically a measure of an entity's ability to meet any cash flow mismatch through its internal or external sources. As discoms in India are the weakest link, projects generally suffer from a delay in receipt of invoices. For a weaker off-taker, the requirement of a higher liquidity, therefore, becomes a buffer and is incumbent to uplift its credit profile. The major sources that we evaluate, that we take into account while assessing the liquidity profile pertain to the available cash balances in an entity, the expected future cash flows in the near term, availability of debt service coverage reserve, as well as undrawn working capital limits, if any. Moving on to the refinancing risk. Most of the projects do have a long funding tenor. However, in the past, we have also witnessed companies do engage in short-term financing to take benefit of the lower interest rates in case there may be any in the near term. So Care Edge views longer tenor debt as better and a ballooning repayment profile as better than a shorter tenor debt, because a shorter tenor debt is primarily exposed to the refinancing risk, and it could happen that company may have raised short-term funding at a very competitive rate. However, at the time of raising the refinanced facility, the rate of funding goes up, which protrudes this risk. Further, the foreign exchange risk also comes at play, as most of the developers also try to seek US dollar finance, whereas the revenue stream is primarily in the Indian rupee. So that does create a mismatch. In case a developer is fully hedging that exposure, that risk stands mitigated. However, in case that's not hedged, that remains as a critical risk factor in project evaluation. Moving on to the third pillar, which is a very important pillar, is pertaining to the management and parentage. Now, while ascertaining the management and parentage, we look at the nature of the parentage as well as the commitment by the parent. By nature, I mean there have a lot of financial investors have been active in the Indian market. In fact, that's been the case globally as well. Some of the very large private equity funds, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds are active in the market apart from global corporates. So that does add a lot of reputation sensitivity to those projects, and that in turn lends the project with the requisite financial flexibility. Apart from this, CareEdge also looks at the quality of management, its track record in building a portfolio, as well as the group's track record of supporting the projects wherever there have been, in case there has been any stress on those projects. Moving forward, just to give a perspective, these are the top 15 developers in the Indian context in the wind and solar domain, and they comprise roughly 30% of the overall installed capacity. So out of these 15 developers, CareEdge has exposure in CareEdge has exposure in almost every developer. Either we are rating their special purpose vehicles, or we are rating their holding companies, or we have exposure in terms of rating their co-obligor or structure, or various structures that they have in the market. Coming on to the fourth section, I would speak about the key trends which have dominated the RE sector. So primarily, I've segmented them into 5. One is there has been some consolidation in the renewable energy sector, both global as well as in India. Secondly, solar PV modules, which are primarily sourced from China, there has been some hardening of the prices in the last 18 odd months. Thirdly, what we have witnessed is there has been an increased emphasis and an increased focus on the ESG by both corporates as well as countries. Further, plain vanilla solar and wind tenders have somehow become rare, and more newer forms of technologies are coming and hitting the market. As well as what we see is most of the countries are initiating protectionist measures to set up a domestic manufacturing ecosystem. Coming on to the first step with respect to the consolidation in the RE sector, the key reasons for the pickup in the M&A activity has been either the proactive approach by corporates towards ESG, as well as increased investor participation. On this slide, I've highlighted some of the key deals that have taken place in the global context. Coming on to the Indian context, the M&A started picking up from financial year 2018. Financial year primarily refers to a period from April to March in a particular year. So FY18 refers from April 2017 to March 2018, where Renew, which is the biggest, largest developer in India, acquired assets of Ostro, which was basically a platform promoted by Actis, which is a PE fund. In FY19, we saw deals up to around 1.2 gigawatt, and the primary deal being GIC-backed Greenco acquiring assets of AT Capital's Orange Renewables. Furthermore, there have been activities in the last 2 years as well, with major deals being Adani Power acquiring assets of SoftBank, and this year the deal is about to be closed, where Shell is entering the Indian market in the RE space and acquiring the asset of Actis, a platform of Actis, that is Sprung Energy. Coming on to the second trend, that is the cost, that is pertaining to the cost pressure due to the elevated module prices. So if one looks at the trend, even though solar module prices, if one looks at the 10-year trend, have reduced from $2.7 per watt to 20 cents, over the last 18 odd months, there has been some correction, with prices increasing by roughly around 35%, from 20 cents to around 28 cents at present. This has primarily been on account of supply chain disruptions in China due to the power crisis. Secondly, increased demand of solar modules, as well as changes in the duty structure in various countries, including India, wherein developers have tried to prepone their sourcing so that to evade certain kind of duties. This has indeed added to the overall cost pressure. However, despite this increase, the cost competitiveness of renewable energy will be very high with respect to the other sources like thermal and gas. The third pillar I wanted to speak about was pertaining to the increased emphasis on ESG, as well as India's commitment at the COP26. ESG related activity is maturing across the globe, as corporates take a more proactive approach to ESG transition. Until recently, ESG-led adoption was largely considered reactive to regulatory and activist pressure. However, companies are now managing ESG risk as part of their overall strategy, which is very heartening to see. And they see ESG as a key component of future growth. Moreover, the world got together at the 26th UN Climate Change Conference at Copenhagen and committed towards limiting the carbon footprint and tackling the climate change. The other goals towards which countries committed their intentions include curbing the temperature increase, curbing methane emissions, as well as tackling deforestation and promoting electric vehicles. India also participated in that summit along with other key nations like China, USA, and every nation committed certain thresholds. Like India has committed to increase its non-fossil fuel capacity, which is roughly 1 gigawatt right now. It plans to increase it to 500 gigawatt, which is a very staunch target and involves involves an annual increment of 45 gigawatt every year. Secondly, India further committed to meet 50% of its energy requirement through RE by 2030. It further committed to reduce carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. It further committed to ensure that it becomes a net zero carbon economy by 2070. And China is committed to become a net zero carbon emission economy by 2060. Moving forward, with respect to the innovative technologies, as I briefly introduced, plain vanilla wind and plain vanilla solar have actually become a thing of past, and they have actually become very common technologies. So going forward, we expect development in terms of offshore wind, which has immense potential, and out of the global 3,000 odd capacity, only 40 gigawatt is offshore wind. So going forward, this is a very under-penetrated territory, and it could offer a great opportunity. Similar is the status of floating solar, which has also been unexplored because of the higher costs. But going forward, it is expected that costs would come down. We have already seen the world focusing on battery storage, and to ensure that the intermittency of the renewable energy sources is taken out of question, and it can compete and provide base load as does thermal, nuclear, or gas power. As well as the world is together working on exploring opportunities in the green hydrogen space, and this holds immense potential. Moving forward to the last trend that we see is with respect to the protectionist measures. As China has dominated the solar module manufacturing capacity footprint, it has roughly 350 gigawatt of installed module manufacturing capacity, and China plans to increase that to 500 gigawatt by calendar year 2022 end. The world continues to remain reliant on China for meeting its RE targets. Despite the COVID as well as the supply chain challenges, the world witnessed a lot of challenges in terms of sourcing, and as a result, globally, all the countries are trying to ensure a better domestic manufacturing ecosystem. India has also shared some plans. The Indian module manufacturer capacity, in contrast to China, is minuscule at only 18 gigawatts. However, the country plans to increase that capacity, with government introducing a lot of schemes such as the production linked scheme, wherein the government has committed a grant of roughly $3 billion to set up domestic manufacturing facilities. Apart from that, developers on their own, as listed on the chart on the right, have committed growth plans of increasing their own setup. Coming on to the outlook for the renewable energy sector, outlook for the RE sector continues to remain very, very, very promising, despite there being a few headwinds with respect to hardening of the input prices. The tailwinds that particularly contribute to the sector include the superior tariff competitiveness, with tariff set to remain sub 4 cents per unit for plain vanilla options. Moreover, the sector continues to be supported by strong policy focus with the support of the respective governments as well as the international agencies. Moreover, most of the countries have set up very ambitious growth targets, and they are necessitating action on that front and making conducive policies to achieve those targets. Further, the emerging innovative technologies and the compliance towards ESG would continue to act as a thrust area. Apart from it, we continue to see very enhanced investor interest as large capital commitments have been promised by all the most of the pension funds, so wealth funds, as well as private equity players. With this, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thanks for being very patient, listeners.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arya Jatin. You have given us a very comprehensive framework for a credit rating analyst to use. And actually, it's so broad, but I'd like to see if I can go down to some more specifics that I can, let's say, if I were a credit rating analyst, more useful for me immediately. I'm looking, Jatin, I'm looking for benchmarks. Normally, and of course that's a relative term, normally, how long does it take or should it take to install a renewable energy generating capacity, let's say, solar and wind, from feasibility study to start of operations? And perhaps it's going to be a range, because that is if a prospective investor, a big investor, would come for investment, say, how long would it take? Because, and may I add something to that question? It's a big, broad question as it is, but how long does it take, solar and wind? And then at what stage is the risks highest? Okay, so that will add to our understanding of the nice framework you have given us.
Fair enough. Now, essentially in India, what we have seen is for utility scale solar projects, generally when a project developer wins a project in a particular bid, it is given a time frame of 18 months. These days, but it's between 13 to 18 months to set up the project. But generally, project developers do, they have actually done their own feasibility studies, and they already have an estimate with respect to the expected generation. In terms of solar, the major bottlenecks that come while installing a project include getting the land clearances as well as securing the evacuation infrastructure. In case those things are available, 12 to 18 months is a very good time frame to install solar projects, and that has been even displayed even in India as well as abroad by all the developers. For wind, it's a slightly longer time, as the compliances in terms of getting the statutory approvals in wind are a lot more in India. So it roughly takes between 18 to 24 months to install a wind power plant.
I see. 18 to 24. Well, I suppose, is it correct to say that anybody today, if anybody wants to go to solar, he or she is not really going to start from scratch. There are already available, you might say, more or less, I don't know whether you can call it templates, but some basic studies against which you can make some decisions. Is that correct?
Correct. That's
readily
correct.
available.
Right. So there are agencies, let's say if you are trying to gauge the wind potential of a particular site, because wind potential may be very good at a particular site and it may not be very good at an alternate site. So there are agencies who would actually install wind masts and they would collect data for various sites, and they would actually sell that data to the developers. So developers would rely on that data, and essentially when a developer wants to set up a new project, it does not have to set up its own mast and monitor the performance for 2-3 years to ascertain what kind of a generation this site can promise. It can rely on that second-hand data, that is secondary data that is available with him, and go ahead with the project.
Have the more recent solar farms or wind farms, have they shown profits? When I say recent, I mean the ones that have been set up, say, over the last 5 years. Have they shown
Right.
profits?
Have they seen profits?
Yes.
Right. So they have been making, I mean, look, how the tariffs actually declined. The tariffs were somewhere around 10 to 11 rupees, some 8-10 years back. That roughly translates to roughly around 17-18 cents. Basically, tariffs were somewhere around that point, somewhere around that level. And tariff had declined somewhere to around 7-8 cents in the interim. And even we as analysts were uncertain whether the developers would be able to actually achieve commissioning, and we felt that a lot of the projects would not see the light of the day. Further, the tariffs from 6-7 cents declined to 3 odd cents as well, a low of 3 odd cents. So I mean, the developers obviously have not come so far, even though they have bid at 3 cents, they've not been able to commission those projects right now because they are still under commissioning. But they have commissioned projects at lower tariffs of as low as 4 cents, even sub 4 cents in India.
I see. Thank you. Are there any, may I entertain questions from the group? You can just raise your hand. You can just ask your questions directly to Mr. Arya.
Yes, hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
we can hear you.
Yes. My name is Mir Arif Tilla. I am speaking from Credit Rating Agency of Bangladesh, CRAP. And thank you, Mr. Jotin, for your wonderful presentation. I have 2 questions. My first question is that the land is scarcity at this moment all over the world, especially in our subcontinent, India, Bangladesh. I mean, good quality land. But solar is, we observe the solar is growing at a good higher pace. And my question is that how effective the floating solar project in our country might be in India, and does it affect the environment, water, river, if the floating solar panel? And another question is the how much the how machine life of the solar panel life, usually how many years, is it 10 years or 15 years, and how much operating cost does it require? Can we explain these issues?
Fair enough. So I'd answer both your questions. First, I'll come to the land part. I totally agree with you that land is very scarce across the globe, and solar, to set up 1 megawatt of solar capacity, it generally takes up a higher acreage than, let's say, a thermal. A thermal or any other source of project. But there is a lot of agriculture wasteland that is essentially there in India. Plus, apart from it, rooftops is one way where we can effectively better put our land, put our land to better use. So that could basically help. I mean, rooftop solar is very prevalent in the European countries, whereas in India and the Indian subcontinent, it's not taken up that well so far. So going forward, if there is favorable policy support, this would come up. The second part of your first question was pertaining to the floating solar. So in India also, floating solar, only pilot projects have been installed, 5 odd megawatts, 10 odd megawatts at maximum, even 1 megawatt plants. And essentially the costing of, those mounting structures which stay on those ponds and lakes is pretty high, as well as setting up that whole transmission infrastructure. So at present, what we understand from the industry participants is it may not be a financially viable option at present. However, the industry is working and is manifesting a lot of resources to ensure that it becomes a more practical option. Coming on to the second question that you mentioned with respect to the solar panels and its operating cost, as well as the time frame till when we expect them to continue. Look, unlike wind turbines, started becoming popular in early 2000s, whereas solar panels only gained popularity in early 2010s. So even though the developers promise a 25-year life period for the projects, they also indicate that these panels would degrade by roughly around 0.5 to 0.7%. And so far, we have had a track record of 8 to 10 years. With the technological improvements, mostly we have seen that the actual degradation has been in line with the promised degradation. So it does, year on year efficiency of a module does deteriorate, but we also estimate them to withstand the full 25-year tenor. And with respect to the operating cost, in terms of rupee, it's somewhere around 3.5 lakh per megawatt. So that roughly translates to, we have to divide it by 75 basically.
Okay, thank you.
Did you get your answer, Mr. Bila?
Yes, I got my.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions, please? Christine?
Yes.
Christine Zhang, yes.
Yes.
Ask your question, Christine.
Yes, this is Christine from CCXI. We are a Chinese rating agency. And I'm interested actually in your methods. So is the methods designed for the SPV, the projects, or the company? Because you know that in China, despite that there are a lot of infrastructure projects, but we seldomly, have such kind of methods on the infrastructure projects. We rate those companies who built it. So what's the method designed for? And could you maybe simply describe the rating process for us for this kind of SPVs or projects? And do you have, separate rating symbols for these kind of products, or is that just the same as the other products? Thank you.
Right. Hi, Christine. If I could get your question primarily pertained to whether the methodology that we discussed, that was applicable for a single project or maybe a holding company kind of a thing. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Fair enough. So how CARE analyzes, what I spoke about was pertaining to a single project SPV. Let's say in one, we create a company and we are creating a ring fence structure and setting up a 100 megawatt project in that company. So I was primarily talking about how we would analyze that company. I totally understand how Chinese corporates are dealing with the enhancing infrastructure. They are setting up more and more projects in a particular holding company and expanding. Even in India, that's been the case. So essentially for those companies, we have a very different methodology. We essentially look at project-specific risks and we combine all those SPVs into one. So basically, we follow the consolidation method.
Thank you very much. And do you have a separate symbol for this kind of products, or it's just the same as others?
No, the symbol remains the same. Okay. In case there is any credit enhancement from an external source, then we apply a symbol as per the Indian regulations. If there is no credit enhancement from an external source, we do not apply a symbol.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Any more questions, please? Okay, I will ask another question. I was asking you, Jatin, earlier about how long it takes normally from study to installation operations of a renewable energy generating capacity. Now, I'd like to ask you your personal opinion. How long would a credit rating analyst take to make a good analysis of a renewable energy project using your framework? It's a very personal question.
Sorry, I missed the.
How long will it take you?
How long?
How long, yeah. Because you know,
Right.
when rating companies come, they always have, as you might have experienced, they're always in a hurry. You know, it takes them too long to sign the contract. Then when they sign the contract, they want the rating immediately. But how long? What do you think?
Concur
From your
with
standpoint.
your right. So basically I started evaluating these renewable energy projects some 6 years back, and at that point in time, the technology was pretty new. At that point in time, I mean, we were also very uncertain whether the modules would stand till the project tenure, and we used to have a lot more doubts. But as the investor interest has increased, developers have come out with various clarifications, and they have at best satisfied all the stakeholders. So our confidence has also improved. So earlier, if we were rating a project SPV, we used to, I mean, a standalone SPV, maybe we used to take somewhere around 4 to 5 weeks post getting all the information. We used to read a lot, etc. But these days, maybe we are able to complete the assessment in a couple of weeks to 3 weeks timeline. However, having said that, let's say if tomorrow, I mean, even though these are all very new technologies, battery backed, green hydrogen, etc., if they come to us, we'll have to, I mean, do a lot more groundwork, and it may take a couple of months perhaps to complete those assignments, because to ascertain the financial viability, to interact with a lot of stakeholders, whether that's even possible. Because if we give a rating and the lenders, the investors invest their money, so we have to act as good custodians, basically.
Okay. Any more questions, please, from the audience?
Yes, I would want to have one question.
Des Tabarina first, and then Maham. Okay, Des.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm from Philippine Rating Services, Phil Ratings. I just would like to ask if there has been some trend on the overall ratings of the renewable energy companies. Have there been a lot of downgrades, or the ratings just maintained in view of the pandemic? Because I'm just thinking that there would have been some delays in some of the projects because of the mobility restrictions. Thank you.
Right. A very relevant question, Tabrina. I mean, I've assessed the rating trend in the Indian context, and I can speak about that. And I believe it would largely mirror what's been the global trend. So in the last 18 to 20 months, rather surprisingly, we have seen a lot of upgrades rather than downgrades. This has primarily been on account of 2-3 factors. One is the increased investor activity. So earlier, if let's say a particular asset was being promoted by a nondescript promoter, and now that asset is being acquired by, let's say, a sovereign wealth fund. So that does introduce the asset to better parentage, which has actually uplifted the ratings. Secondly, we've also seen that the interest rate cycle, the interest rates declined significantly over the last 12 to 18 months. So a lot of Indian corporates were able to borrow fixed tenor debts, 3 to 5 year kind of debts at lower interest rates, thereby assuring better coverage parameters for those projects. And thirdly, what we have seen is that a lot of the projects which came up in the last 3 to 5 years, they have actually stabilized. And as renewables are a must-run source, so the offtake is guaranteed. So the projects that have actually stabilized, they have actually started producing the envisaged numbers, and that has actually led some rating upgrades.
Did you get your answer, Des?
Thank you.
Okay, Maham, did you want, or would you like to ask your question now?
Yes, I'll want to ask a question. My name is Maham Qasim. I'm a manager in VIS Credit Rating Company from Pakistan. My question is, number one, thank you so much for the comprehensive presentation. It was very informative. Actually, my question is basically on the prospective ratings of renewable energy projects versus the ratings of non-renewable projects. Actually, in Pakistan, we have divided both these sectors, renewable on one side and non-renewables on the other. My question basically is that because in Pakistan now there's a lot of focus on shifting the energy mix to non-renewable projects, because the alternative energy board wants to shift the total energy generation by 2030 to 30% of to renewables from non-renewables. So my question, and there are some merit order list orders also, where if you are generating energy from a renewable source, then it is less costly. So procurement from that project is more viable. So my question basically is based on these things, that do you think that going forward 5-7 years into the rating process, that the ratings of the renewable projects will or shall be higher than the non-renewable projects?
Fair enough. I totally understand the perspective you are bringing in. I mean, look, there is one key difference between a renewable and a non-renewable project. Even though a thermal project may have its cost metrics covered, but it is exposed to risks pertaining to fuel. So in India, what we have seen is that coal, which is the primary fuel source, there has been a lot of issues in sourcing that. Coal availability has been on a decline, plus the rake availability, the rakes basically to use to transfer the coals, the Indian Railways has not been able to assure them that. Plus China had a power crisis and it consumed a lot of imported coal from Australia and in Indonesia. So that made those risks more protruded for a thermal power plant. Vis-a-vis a renewable, the renewable has its own set of challenges in terms of intermittency. In case the project does not achieve the envisaged level of generation, it's not a two-part tariff. Basically, it doesn't guarantee you anything if you don't achieve generation. So it has its own set of risks. Thermal has its own set of risks. It would be very hard to say that. I mean, it would be very hard to compare. We'll have to deep dive into the project-specific nuances to ascertain whether, it can be either ways. A renewable project can be stronger than a thermal project and vice versa. So there is no definitive answer in my opinion.
Maham, did you get your answer? Okay, any more questions, please? No more questions? Then we can move on. And again, thank you very much,
Thank you,
Mr. Arya, for your very nice question and answer session. And we do have a few more questions, but we will have to wait, and probably you just have to come to Manila to answer my questions. Thank you very much on behalf of ACRAA and on behalf of the audience. Now let us move to the second topic. Well, there's nothing like a COVID-19 pandemic to bring worldwide attention to healthcare service providers, to pharmaceuticals, and particularly to vaccines. Now we discover the primacy of disease prevention, disease protection, disease immunization, all about health, and we say, yes, indeed, health is wealth. Now, we as credit rating analysts, our focus is on how healthcare issues and problems of companies we rate, how do they impact on our credit rating assessments. But having said that, we have to look at the big picture, the forest, so to speak, so we can better understand and appreciate the trees that compose the forest. So, healthcare, again, such a broad topic, but I'm sure our speaker will help us navigate into this, through this big forest, and give us some very valuable inputs to our work we can apply immediately to our work assignments. So, I would like to introduce to you our speaker. You have his profile right on the screen, but let me just make my own highlights. Mr. Vidya Sagar has been with CareEdge for over 13 years and is presently serving as Chief Ratings Officer at CareEdge Ratings Africa, a subsidiary of CareEdge. He is a charter holder from CFA Institute USA and Global Association of Risk Professionals Certified Financial Risk Manager. He's an engineer holding an MBA degree from Birthing Institute of Management in Trichy, India. His involvement in ratings cuts across several sectors: infrastructure, power, pharmaceuticals, banks, manufacturing, logistics, tourism, real estate, a real wide field indeed. And so he comes to share his valuable knowledge with us, as he has in many other training programs before this. Let us welcome Mr. Vidya Sagar Lingesan.
Thank you, Santi. Good afternoon to everyone.
Welcome.
I think now it's decisive that it's afternoon. So everybody move to afternoon zone now.
Yeah.
And I would like to thank ACRAA for giving this opportunity to connect with various credit rating agencies across Asia. I'll share my presentation. Hope it's visible. Now, Mr. Santi, it's visible. Is it okay?
Yes, we can see it. Very nice, very nice.
Okay. So, very good afternoon to everyone. So, the health sector has grown in the last 2 decades leaps and bounds in terms of size or technological developments. This development has served as a backbone for the world to fight against the COVID in the last 2 years. Be it treatment of patients in hospitals, or the understanding of complexity of the virus, its outbreak or the treatment, and even the pace at which vaccines have been invented. This perhaps we can say that it has brought out the superhuman capability of our own race to fight against such disastrous virus. Today, though, our focus area is infrastructure project evaluation. Given the importance of the healthcare industry, we will touch upon the global and Asian healthcare industry snapshots, followed by key trends globally as well as the developments in Asia, and then how the healthcare sector is evolving, and how the future of healthcare is likely to look a decade down the line. And finally, we get on with the project evaluation risk framework. So, in general, whenever we talk about the pharma industry, see, because the pharma or healthcare is predominantly has 2 sectors, pharma and hospitals. 90% contributed by these 2 sectors, whereas the remaining, other ecosystems or the pathological labs all contribute to the remaining 10% of this sector. Why any discussion on pharma gravitates towards US market or the European market is primarily because of its sheer contribution to this 2 sectors. United States contributes around 30% to the pharma sector, and both put together almost close to 50%. And that is why any manufacturing company, a pharma in anywhere in the world, would want to have their products sold in these markets. So the global healthcare industry was estimated at 8.45 trillion in 2018, and it was estimated to reach 10 trillion by end of this year, with an average growth rate of 7 to 8% of compounded annual growth rate. The healthcare spending in developed countries account for over 10% as per country's GDP, whereas in developing nations it's very low. It's around 3%. The effect of the same could be observed in various per capita income also, wherein per capita expenditure on healthcare by the developed countries is over $5,000, whereas in developing nations it is below 500 USD. This one indicates the kind of market scope that exists with developing nations. And this is also on account of the lack of penetration of the healthcare sector in the developing and underdeveloped nations. However, we see a significant surge in this penetration thanks to the healthcare access as well as increased multilateral funding agencies having their presence and trying to make a difference, and also the deepening of the healthcare insurance sector. Asian healthcare industry, as per some estimate, it is likely to reach $4.2 trillion by 2024, which was less than half by when it was in 2017. This almost represents like 12% growth rate, a much faster expansion than the 5% growth rate which the global pharma or the healthcare industry is seeing. The major trends are likely to define some of the Asia's healthcare systems are technological advances in healthcare, increased consumerism, growing chronic and lifestyle related disease, and also the aging population. Catalyzed by the pandemic, a trend taking off all over Asia is the rise of digital medicine platforms. Telemedicine user growth in Southeast Asia increased by 5 to 6 times since the start of this pandemic. And it is expected that China telemedicine market to overtake US market which is the largest market perhaps by 2025. And also Southeast Asian countries are establishing themselves as a home to vibrant medical tourism industry. India is also primed to ride on the booming biosimilar market. And they have been riding on the growth in the pharma industry in the last decade. And Japan's healthcare industry is on the cusp of digital transformation driven by need to innovate and mounting demographic challenges. Asia had more than 50% of world's internet users in 2020, and the number is increasing. It leads to innovative research in technological domain in multiple sectors. Is one of the multiple sectors, and healthcare is one of them. Today, this digital health impacts more than lives, billions of lives, and estimates show that digital health in Asia usage nearly like doubled for both consumers and physicians post COVID-19. Similarly, the use of remote patient monitoring and augmented reality tools increased 60 to 70%, and the number of physicians leveraging on artificial intelligence or the machine learning more than doubled in this last 2 years. The growth in healthcare market in Asia also majorly contributed by India, China, and other Southeast Asian countries. This was primarily fueled by increase in the consumerism, as we said earlier. The healthcare market is also attracting significant private equity funds investment in this region. The number of transactions have actually increased from 156 in 2020 to 179, and the value-wise it has increased from 16.9 billion to 17.8 billion. So we'll be touching upon like which are the areas they are focusing and then investing in the subsequent slides. So this slide depicts the current scenario and which is the desirable as well. So in India, this is an Indian scenario, and I don't think there is much difference between the Indian scenario and the rest of the Asian scenario as far as the current infrastructure is concerned. In India, presently, there is 1.5 million bed capacity as against 3.5 million requirements. So if you see as per WHO guideline, you need to have 3.5 beds per 1,000 people. And the desirable amount to have a comfortable healthcare infrastructure like that of the developed nations, it would be around 5.1 million. Likewise, in terms of resource also, presently Indian system has 1 million physicians and 2 million support staff, which bare minimum requirement to meet the WHO guideline of 14 per 10,000 by 2035. It has to be increased to 3 million physicians and 6 million nurses. And to reach the desired level, there is a huge gap. So the similar trend is being observed in the rest of the Asian countries as well. So as I was saying a couple of slides before, there is a significant improvement in the private equity investments coming into this. So earlier, private equity investors used to come with a fund life for say 5 years. And we have seen them exiting by the end of the 5th year or 4th year, or they may get extended based on the market situation. If they are not able to get the IPO, which is a public listing, they may get extended and they have to find the replacement. But what we see now is every PE investor has a primary focus on healthcare sector, and they are building a portfolio of assets. No, they are acquiring pharma companies if they have their focus is a pharma. And also there is a primary focus in the segments or therapeutic segments which they want to enter into. And it is coming with no timelines. That means it is coming in as a pure equity, and they don't even have exit timelines when they come in. So, and other development is all these PE investors who used to come in as a minority minority shareholders, now they're coming in as a majority shareholders. And most of them are even showing interest to take over the business 100%, which has happened in the last 2 years. So this gives a fair idea that there is a significant growth potential. And as we know, pharma is a defense industry, and irrespective of any cycle, it is expected to perform well from the investor perspective. So this is giving a significant protection for these investors in their overall portfolio as well. So some of the themes, when we say themes of M&A, what is the ideology of those funds when investing? Some of them come for the portfolio optimization, some do it for ESG compliance, and some do it enter into the digital platforms where they have a significant scope of expanding into the other geographies as well. And some come to meet the regulatory requirements. So these are the different themes of the mergers and acquisitions which has happened in India and other Asian countries as well. So health insurance is one tool which will help the unpenetrated market of the lesser developed countries, underdeveloping developing countries, to reach to the treasury level. Presently, even most of the Asian countries at capital city levels or the tier 1, tier 2 city level, you have excellent infrastructure. Whereas it goes to the tier 3 and the towns and villages, the dearth of quality infrastructure is still continuing. So this health insurance is one area which will help to reach, take this healthcare industry to reach into the deeper zones. And also we, in the past, we have seen the growth of 4% in global health insurance, and in Asia it was 2.5. However, the recent trends are very promising. One, because of the COVID, also significant health insurance are being taken up. And also the growth at which it is likely to grow in the next 4-5 years are at a much higher pace than it was witnessed in the last 4-5 years. And the insurance tech, which is at 1 billion, which is in the 2004 way back, and it grew to 7 billion in 2019. But given the COVID-related challenges, these companies have grown significantly from 7.2 to 14 billion. This is on the transactions executed. There are a number of companies whose valuations are shot up because of addition of a significant amount of consumers on their platform. So probably you will see the monetization of such platforms 2-3 years down the line, and it is expected to even double or triple in the next 3-4 years time. So healthcare insurance premium have seen a surge in collection. This is primarily on account of the increased premium. We cannot say that number of people have increased. So there can be an aberration in this data point, which we see in the year 2021. So this is another area which is getting all the limelights now, mental health. So what has happened after COVID? People have gone into the work from home mode, and especially women are found to be affected mentally, because most of them handle, and especially the new moms, handle their babies as well as handle the house chores and also the office work. So this has created a tremendous mental health scenarios, because of which many corporates have also started giving counseling for such all the employees to overcome such a situation. And a survey says almost 25 to 35% of the global population, some way or the other way, has been affected mentally during this COVID. And the estimated loss on account of this mental health, both directly or indirectly, it is more than $16 trillion. When I say over a period of that 2011 to 30, it can be $16 trillion, but it is likely to go in a single year to $6 trillion, which you can see at the bottom. So it can be direct loss or on account of the mistakes you commit because of the mental pressure. And the suicide cases have been increasing. Globally, every 40 seconds, one person is committing suicide. And also, the number of next to the accidents, the number of people in the age of 15 to 24 are most deaths are on account of the suicide. So why I'm highlighting this is opening up a new segment altogether, where there are handled the tracking watches. A new equipment is being invented which is used for the meditation, and this is likely to gain a lot of traction in the next few years. And India and China are the most affected because of this mental health. Almost 36% are suffering from the depression. Either it can be a major or minor. And healthcare space is, as I said, evolving at much faster rate than we expected, 3-4 years back. The COVID-19 situation across necessitated several pharma companies and researchers to speed up the process of both treatment and the vaccines. And due to several participants playing the field of treatment and vaccines, it has created a near future that it will be a serious dialogue between companies, government and all stakeholders to bring in the technology, pull in the technology, and also disseminate to the poor and needy at the faster pace. And also the technology has helped us to reach the patients who stay at home without traveling from their house to the hospitals because of the lockdown scenario. And some of this telemedicine segment is one segment which is gaining traction. And as you can see in India, there are these are all most of them have started their commercial operations just before COVID or during COVID, and you can see their number of users have gone 5 times, 3 times, and same as with China, which has seen 9 times growth in their users. So, and the digital therapeutic segment, when I say this digital therapeutic segment, this is the one head-mounted device which is used for soothing and comforting of your mental pressure and helps you to reduce the depression. So there are some following developments after the government and the innovators have come together. They have created something called medicine patent pool or the collaborative innovation, and also some various developments in the artificial intelligence and big data analytics. We'll see each and every one. in collaborative, since the COVID has struck, more than like 16 life-saving drugs has been developed, tested and approved in a record time, which is a normal scenario would have taken a decade. This would not have been become a reality without the remarkable and rapid collaboration with the researchers and the universities and the corporates. Just to give an example, you would have heard that Covishield was invented by Oxford University along with the AstraZeneca and Serum Institute. And see, this is like researchers have the technology know-how, and AstraZeneca has their R&D facilities, and Serum was able to come up with the scale which they can manufacture and supply to the global markets. So this is one example of a collaborative development, and I'm just restricting this, but the same is being extended to the other pharmaceutical medicines as well, apart from the vaccine. And this also has aided more leeway for medicine patent pooling also to evolve at a similar pace. So when I say medicine patent pool, here it is a kind of an association created in July 10, though there was no much traction. There used to be the drugs used for HIV with ARV related drugs, where the innovators, though it is under the patent in the developed markets, they came in, and then this patent has been pooled with the other manufacturing companies in low cost manufacturing countries like India and China, and these were manufactured at large scale and also been supplied to the the continents like Africa, where the demand is very high. Despite of all this, even today there is a huge demand supply gap for the HIV drug. Likewise, any life-saving drug, whenever an innovator comes up with, and then the patent will be there for next 15 to 20 years based on the investment in those products, whereas that can be made available in other countries or developing countries at a much cheaper rate through this medicine patent pooling. And when we talk about the future, so we know this artificial intelligence and big data analysis and data analytics are doing big rounds or buzzword in the finance sector or the relevant sector, but it has a significant relevance in pharma as well, pharma and healthcare. With the use of artificial intelligence, the drug discovery and development process can be accelerated. The startups are exploring to use this technology to address various challenges in pharma, such as an automation and optimization of manufacturing process, as well as designing effective marketing and post-launch strategies, and patient identification, which is actually a crucial step for clinical trials, that is being accelerated with this technology. Likewise, the pharma industry also requires like high-performance systems to analyze the large volume of data generated during this drug discovery process. The pharmaceutical companies use third parties to share data with collaborators, and making data management a crucial area of focus. This advancement in analytical techniques is also turning historical and real-time data available with the pharmaceutical companies into a valuable asset for predictive, diagnostic, and descriptive analytics. And also you have this precision medicine, which this is more used in the treatment of cancer, where the cancer cells are being targeted precisely without affecting the other cells. So with these developments, specifically in the cancer treatment, which is a very painful process people have to go through, will come down drastically, and it will be a painless process going forward once this precision medicine advances in the near future. And finally, in this space, blockchain is one thing which, again, this is also a buzzword in the finance industry, and the same thing can be used here as well. The blockchain technology is plays a very significant role in this pharmaceutical industry at every stage of production and distribution of drugs. The stakeholders in this pharma industry are in general extremely secretive about the data to the sensitive nature of this being leaked out. So this blockchain will help them to tackle use of any counterfeit medicines or leakage of any information which they store. The digitization of transactions makes this blockchain a promising solution for tracking and securing pharma transaction ecosystem. And so the genomics or microbiometrics as well as virtual healthcare, these are all in a very nascent stage. Lot of developments can happen or will happen in the near future. So this can be the future of the healthcare. So this will help. This future of healthcare will have whatever I have said. That part of the entire thing will be part of the ecosystem. Either it can be a digitalization or the assisted monitoring from the remote locations, and then community care, as well as the primary, secondary, and tertiary can be linked with all this, and it will be provided for everyone with the ability to take the internet to the deeper pockets. And now we are to the key topic of this afternoon, which is on a project evaluation framework. So, this I will try to cover the project risk framework of pharma companies as well as the hospital sector, whereas those two would be the quite frequently encountered assignments which as a rating agency we will be coming across. And whereas this analytical framework is common for both, only the business risk will be, there will be a difference in pharma as well as hospitals. So there we will touch upon that, whereas the remaining construct of this framework will remain same for both. So first, the management risk. Under the management risk, we will try to assess first whether there is a financial capability of the company or the promoter, individual promoters, to bring in and fund the project. And next is the past experience. Past experience, when we say that they have done a similar projects, or at least they have done any other projects completed successfully, their success will be seen as a positive factor when we analyze for this entity. And third would be the operational linkage. When I say operational linkage, it can be part of a group's entity. There can be a backward integration of an existing business, or can be a forward integration. This would be seen definitely a positive for the risk perspective. But if it is a standalone, yes, there won't be much strength to it. It has to be seen in isolation. And finally, the key management personnel and their experience in setting up projects and running a business will be analyzed. Construction risk, it would be like any other manufacturing company, just that we will have to look into some specifics for this industry, especially the statutory clearance. Statutory clearance, it can be from the pollution control board of the local location, and water board, and fire engine, because these are all high risk as far as these regulators are concerned. And once you see the key statutory clearances are there, so that will be viewed as a positive from the rating perspective. Next would be the physical status, whether when you are analyzing what is the status of the project. Has it been started, or if there is some sort of investment has gone into it, how it has been funded, or is it at a 0-day status? So based on this, it gets the brownie points. And third point, and this would be the EPC contractor expertise. So though it is not a very complex in terms of execution, nevertheless, you will have to come up with the clean rooms, or even for hospitals also, you need to come up with the ICU, other clean rooms, where you need a special expertise. Not any construction company can come up or build this. So their experience in building a pharma companies or hospitals has to be analyzed. Again, this financial risk is a bit of an overlap in line with the financial closure. Sorry. We'll analyze whether the financial closure for the project is achieved and whether it is fully achieved. Any untied portion will leave actually uncertainty of completion of project as well if the promoter is not able to bring in the funds and then meet that. And when we say ability of infusion of equity, we will be primarily seeing if the promoter can bring in a timely manner. For an individual promoter, it's very difficult to assess. So we normally look into their net worth statements or the liquid assets they have to liquidate and bring in for the equity requirements. And if they bring in equity requirements upfront before the debt is being drawn down, it is definitely a very positive point. And the project leverage. Project leverage has to be seen in tandem with other market players. And of course, the lower the leverage, better from the credit rating point of view. And DSCR. So DSCR and profitability, these two parameters are pretty complex to analyze for a pharma company. Because each and every product and of any pharma company, based on their presence in the value chain and the criticality, the profitability varies, and hence that ability to service the DSCR. So when we go to the business risk, we will look into how we will assess the each and every product and the profitability, and same thing has to be carried for the assessment of this financial risk. So of course, promoter, when they submit their projections, there will always be optimistic about their achievements, whereas you as an analyst, we will have to look into the similar products profitability with the other companies, and we try to take the lowest of the band, because being a new company, it is always difficult to achieve that scale and that profitability level, and hence that could be one way to address that particular issue. And assessment of project cost. Project cost, again, it has to be viewed in line with other projects. So because there can be a scenario where a project cost is like overstated, or it can be even understated. Understating of project can lead to non-completion of the project itself, because when costs shoot up, or even they are not able to bring in the equity, we run the risk of project not getting completed. And likewise, significantly overestimated project cost also can create questions on the management's governance perspective. Finally, the working capital funding. See, not every company will have a working capital funding at the beginning of the project, but here, unlike any other industry, pharma has one uniqueness. Any other manufacturing company, you complete the project, you will start the commercial production and then start doing business. Whereas in pharma, after completion of the project, still you will have a gestation period of anywhere between 1 to 2 years, depending on the project. Depending on the product and the geography where you want to sell, the gestation period can increase anywhere between 1 to 2 years. Any company which is going for a pharma, they should have a backup plan, or not backup plan, rather it should be a base plan to meet the working capital requirement for the first 1 or 2 years without any revenue. So our experience is like we see some of the banks give working capital funding along with the project funding, and which helps them to secure some assurances there for them to carry out the operations without any trouble. And also the repayment schedule also has to be seen in tandem with that, because most of the banks, financial institutions link the repayment with the commercial date of operation, COD. Whereas in pharma, as I said, the gestation period can be like 2 years or 1.5 years it can even go beyond that. So the repayment has to start after 1 year, the least, after the COD is declared. So any company which has a repayment obligation to start after immediate COD, then the support has to come from the promoter, and that is where the ability of the promoter to bring in additional funds to meet this becomes a critical point. So this business risk parameters pertains to the pharma industry. So we need to look at first the proposed products the company is likely to manufacture once they achieve the COD. So a pharma company can be into API manufacturing, or it can be formulations, or they can get into a generic drug, or they want to get into branded drugs, or are they going to be a clinical trials company, or is it going to be a contract manufacturing, or finally it can be even a new drug discovery company as well. So you need to look at the nature of the products which they are proposing to manufacture. Second is how critical these products are in the value chain. When I say value chain, API or intermediates are considered to be less critical, because you will have a number of companies, and if you are in that space, you will be the company will be able to generate lesser margin. And if you go up the ladder, if a formulation company, you will have better margins. This is one aspect of the value chain. And also the criticality of the product. If the company is manufacturing, even if it is an API intermediate, and it is for critical life-saving drugs like oncology or ARV drugs, the margins which they will be able to make would be much higher, and also the demand can be on the higher side. So this will give you a clarity whether there is a demand for such products. Even if I'm a formulation company and I want to make a product like cetirizine, which is used for as an anti-allergic tablet, you will have a number of players, and you may not be still even after completing the project, getting the various approvals, they may not be even able to sell the product. So as an analyst, we have to look into the criticality of the products and the place in the value chain. And third is the therapeutic segment. So this is somewhat interlinked with what I have said earlier. Therapeutic segment is the segment in which they cater to. So for example, when I say ARV, and ARV itself is the antiretroviral segment, and oncology for cancers. So these are all high value drugs, and you end up making high margins when they able to do it. Likewise, there are pain segments, there are acute pain segments, and those segments will also have a higher margin. There are also very generic and low end therapeutic segments. If the company is going to come into that, probably the risk of sales, the business risk is pretty high for such companies. So this is what we can look into it. And also, are the company or is the company is going to have presence in multiple therapeutic segments? Will there be a diversification? So we look at the diversification benefits. And also I have seen some companies having 12 to 13 therapeutic segments for their size of say $20 million company having 10 to 12 therapeutic segments. This, though it is a diversification, it's too much of diversification, because company will not have a focus on the product development. They may be doing a very generic drug, and just like any other new company, they will be making it. So it may not give a great benefits of diversification, and the growth prospect of such companies may be hampered because of the lack of focus. And then you have to look into the demand supply of the products which the company is looking to manufacture. And as I said earlier, the criticality, and there could be the complexity of there is one aspect which we have to look into it, complexity of the drugs. There are, when I say complexity, it is purely a technical term which we can understand by discussing with the clients. And there are some therapeutic segments which are very complex in nature to develop, and of course it gets compensated by way of high margins or high prices. a new company without much experience getting into a complex drug manufacturing, unless they have a very good R&D team, which they have got from, say maybe mostly they will be getting from the competitor. They will be in trouble to get this product see the daylight. So when you analyze the demand and supply, look into the criticality and the complexity of the drug and the ability of the company to actually complete or achieve the targeted product development. And of course, competition in that product space, how big if there are big players, then the small company doesn't stand much chance. When they bring down the products, there will be a bigger issue. They will have to sell it at the losses, because the bigger companies already would have achieved a scale where even the reduction of a price by 10-15%, or even they would have achieved the break even or recovered the entire investment in that vertical. And to kill the competition, they can bring down the price, and the new companies may be out of 2-3 years. They may not be even able to get any headway. And finally, the target geography. So they can manufacture a number of products, and they also can target different geographies. But the likely achievability and then the risk associated with the geography has to be analyzed. So, for example, if a new company putting up their capacity, and they want to sell it to US market. As we know, getting US FDA audit to the site, it takes almost a year or two, based on that, again, the criticality of the drug. If your drug is not critical, they may not even come for 1.5-2 years. So, and they may have to keep the facility without doing any manufacturing. Likewise, if there is if they are putting up multiple blocks, the company can actually target one block targeted to some other geography where you will start generating generating revenue, and some blocks being dedicated only to the US FDA. That way they will be able to diversify a bit. But single block or targeting to only geography, and this has to be seen, like if the company doesn't get revenue for 2 years, how they are going to meet this. So that kind of sensitivity scenario has to be built in when we assess such companies. And so yes, the company may say that they want to manufacture these products, and how do we know that they can actually produce that? One observation in India we have seen is most of the promoters of pharma companies are the technocrats who come out of the other companies and then start. So it is not taken for granted that they know this chemistry well. But that alone wouldn't suffice. They need a team of strong R&D to develop such products. And there is another way of actually accelerating your product approval. What companies do is, when they start the project from the foundation, they also take up a space on a rented space, rented premise, or in a cluster of R&D. So our experience in India is like there are many clusters where only R&D companies are there. So these companies set up a R&D shop there and recruit the team, and they start doing the research from day zero. And when the facility is ready up and running for commercial operations, they can start producing the lab scale or even the large scale and send it to the clients for the validation batches will be sent to the clients for their approval. And once that is approved, they will be just waiting for the regulatory approval for the site. So if somebody new to this, US FDA or any EMA, when they come, they approve the site first. There are two types of approval. One is the project site approval. Another one can be product approval. Product approval happens offline. So you send the product to them. They will undergo. They do their own testing at their site. It will happen online. And finally, they will approve the drug. This is the product approval. Whereas for the facility approval, they will come down to your facility and approve it. Even if you have a product approval, until you have this facility approval, you will not be able to manufacture and sell it to those markets. So this is critical to work in tandem. So your R&D team will start working on the product, and once the project is ready, then they will invite the auditor from the regulatory side. And once they come and give the audit, and then within few months they will be able to start the production. Otherwise, again, it will take more time for them to take it to the scale level. So how it works is like, once your product gets approved, you will also get orders from them, and immediately with the facility approval, you will be able to scale it up within short span. So this is one area of assessment which we may have to get into the deeper aspects of the product and the team and the timelines of product which they propose. And also we have to look into the team's past experience in patenting the products. If they are proposing to manufacture similar products, and they should have involved in development of such products in the past. So that will give some comfort for us to assess their ability to generate such products. And then the products in pipeline. So this actually may be more relevant for the companies up and running. But nevertheless, when a company about to start or a project stage company, when they propose they will be manufacturing like 5 therapeutic segments and 10 to 12 products, it is not like they will be working from day zero on all the 12 products. They will start with some 3-4 products, complete it, and then they move to the other next stage of products. So there will be a proposed timeline and the products in pipeline, different stages when you assess. So that clarity will from the company side, will add some clarity for our projection of the future financials of such companies. And then you have to look at the raw material or key starting material availability. Any pharma product, the final product, to arrive at that product, it has to go through anywhere between, it constitutes of anywhere between 300 to 400 raw materials. But when we say KSM, key starting material, it can be 4 or 5. If any of one is not available, it will be a problem, it will lead to non-production or non-productive days of this of the product. So what has happened in the past, whenever some shutdown has happened in China, in some of the states, there was a significant trouble faced by the Indian pharma companies. They had to go through other resources for the first time. The prices were increased to almost 20 to 30% during that time, and which has taken a big hit on the profitability of all the companies in India. So to avoid such scenario, there should always be a plan for the management to have a alternate resource of sources of getting these raw materials. And last 2 things would be more of a local issues. One is waste management treatment or a waste management disposal facility, and also the water treatment facility. If a company, a manufacturing company, is situated in a cluster of pharma companies, the waste management treatment would be much easier because you will always have a common treatment, and affluent treatment, it will be taken care by them. But if it is a standalone facility, stays away from such cluster, the cost of project also shoots up for keeping this water treatment and waste management facilities. And also any non-compliance of such thing can attract a significant from the local government bodies. Finally, local regulation has to be adhered. We have to see that whether the water treatment norms are met, or they're not polluting any water bodies nearby. And also the pollution control board certificates and the fire engine certificates has to be there, and they have to comply with the local regulations. This would be for the pharma. Then we will be moving on to the businesses associated with the hospital projects. One is we can see the scale and geography diversification. However, when we assess a hospital, we may be doing only for the project, but if it is a bigger brand, they already have presence in others, and this is one of their SPV, then it is viewed, in a very positive way. However, it may not be applicable for a new promoter starting a standalone hospital. And this key important analysis would be the demography analysis. A company can come up with wonderful facility in terms of treatment of all the therapeutic segments. But if you are putting up in a demography where it is, you don't have a population which can afford 2-year facility, it is likely to end up in loss or lack of footfalls. So that is one thing which has to be analyzed. Apparently the promoters also will analyze before doing that, but as an analyst, we will be looking at this perspective as a key thing. And the next one would be the range of products offered. So we have to look into the depth and breadth of the width and depth of the services. When I say the width, can be multiple therapeutic segment. Either you can have a multi-specialty hospital. You provide treatment of be it an oncology or diabetic or neurology. It can be multiple therapeutic segments, multiple segments, and you provide a wide range of services. So that will actually help you to cater to every sector in the demography which you are having presence. But the depth of the services, when I say depth of the services, it can go to the last mile of the treatment. For example, cancer treatment. Again, I'm bringing in this because this is one of the critical segment where many hospitals are getting into a super specialty segment for having only the cancer treatment. So from the initial diagnosis till the final treatment, chemo treatment, or even the laser treatment, so you can have a depth of the services. This also gives you a specialty for any hospital. Or some hospitals may choose to have only 2 or 3 super specialty types, remaining all the wide range of services. So, but a super specialty hospital may not have a bigger scale in a single geography. Such hospitals or such brands should have a multiple location presence. And then we look into the analysis of the brand. If I can put up the hospital, but I don't have the expertise to run the hospital, so I will invite a established brand. They will be the operator, and that also brings a positive aspect to this particular assessment. And also you have to analyze the competition in and around the geography. And some hospitals, this aspect I'm not actually very sure how it works across, but yes, what I see is in developed markets also, insurance ties up with the hospital, and when you go to hospital and probably people doesn't even spend anything, everything gets covered in the insurance. In Asia, I think it's a blend of both. If there is a no cash policy, and if there is a tie-up with hospital and your insurance, you don't have to pay anything. So this will help faster processing of any treatment, as well as the growth of people, the number of people coming for the treatment as well, without hesitating much on the cost being incurred. And finally, the profile of the doctors also has to be analyzed to see if they have expertise in the specific segment which they are climbing for. And finally, these are all some risks may be applicable, may not be applicable to the company you operate. So some of the pharma companies, they will be targeting a geography which can be considered as a high risk, and also currencies where it will be very difficult to get back your money. So if there is such a proposal, then it has to be viewed very sensitively. And also any exposure to political sensitive countries can lead to inability to collect the receivables from such countries, and also look at the local ecosystem if it is very conducive. So that also helps the pharma company or the hospital to grow. And finally, the ESG perspective has to be seen given the context that it is gaining prominence. So presently, ESG is not a mandatory requirement in most of the countries or places. But yes, it is likely to gain momentum in the next 3-4 years. And the impact of any change in be it environment or social norms or the governance norm, we have to look at how the company will be able to cope up. Will it have an impact on the performance or the profitability? That has to be assessed. And also every company or every project which we start analyzing, we have to see from this ESG framework perspective also, see if they are able to survive any negative or adverse scenario goes against the companies in this space. With this, I come to the end of my presentation.
Thank you, thank you. It has really been it's a very long checklist and very thorough. Thank you very much. And I'm just thinking of myself and say, well, I think he gave me all I need. But perhaps I can appreciate it some more if you just tell me, this is a question I always have, how can India produce much cheaper medicine? And how is because in the Philippines we find it Indian manufactured medicines, same brand, much cheaper. And then, but some say, oh, because they're lower quality. For a patient who just needs a medicine, he doesn't have the time to analyze that. But tell me why, how can India produce? And India has become more popular with the pandemic as having the biggest manufacturer for the COVID-19 vaccines. Tell us a little more about that.
Yeah. So I'll give a analogy. So we have Coca-Cola bottle or any soda for that matter. So for example, if you are paying $5 in Singapore for a Coke, the real content which you are drinking would cost probably less than $1 or even much lower. But the remaining we are paying for the brand. So this is one thing. So what I'm trying to drive here is the medicine costs which we are actually having is way cheaper than actually what is being sold in India also. That's a practical aspect. But the pharma companies in US or developed countries, they inbuilt their R&D cost also. So any drug to see the daylight after the new drug discovery mechanism throughout the process, they have to incur anywhere between $3 to $5 billion. Even the cheapest of the drug, they have to incur $3 billion and $5 billion. And what the scientists in India or China normally do is they do the reverse engineering and find the composition of the drug. And you produce the same thing with much lower cost. The product patent is not globally applicable in first place. The product patent is applicable in each and every geography. If a product is patented in US, for example, say it costs like $100, it doesn't mean that the product value is like $100. It is because of the inbuilt investment which has gone through. So that when I talked about medicine patent pooling, so they also know that in the past it was not there. So such a drug to come to the Asian market, it takes almost 10 to 20 years. Once it comes off the patent, then these companies will start manufacturing here. And so now with the huge number of R&D team available in India. So in India, you get cheap labor. When I say labor, not just the labor, even the R&D scientists, you get at a much lower salary than you get anyone in the US market. Maybe like 15-20 times lower. So for any company to come up with such a drug, do a reverse engineering, come up, that expense which they incur in R&D is way, way cheaper for Indian companies. So for US market, they will invest 10% of the sales in the R&D. In India, they do only 3 to 4%. And even the scale is much, much lower. When I say R&D here, Indian R&D are all process R&Ds. You innovate and also they patent the process only. They cannot patent the product. So one thing is the cost which to manufacture in US and here is almost 1/10. But chemical composition will remain same. The process may change, and every product these companies has to establish that it is chemically not different from the one it is there. And then only the regulators will allow any company to sell the drug in the market. So there is a significant cost difference in terms of the R&D people. So if you spend $1 billion in India, you will have to spend like 1/10 of it.
There's no infringement in patent that way.
Yes, there is no infringement of the patent, and the product, if those companies choose to patent in India, then these companies may not be able to sell the same product. But in India, there is no product patent. You will have to do the process patent.
Does the government give any support to R&D very specifically, directly to companies?
Sorry?
We do. Does the Indian government give very specific direct subsidies or support to R&D?
No, they don't give subsidies for R&D, but in the past they were giving 150% of the spending was given as a tax benefit.
Okay.
So when you spend $1, you can claim $1.5 for tax benefit. It was till 2010-12. But given the increased demand from the innovator drugs towards Indian companies, and also the technology improvement in the chemist side, India gained that advantage. And when I said this medicine patent pooling, I'm again going back to this HIV drug, which is called tenofovir and efavirenz. These are some of the medicines which was invented by Gilead. So that was coming off. They came off patent way back in 2015, but they collaborated with the companies in India, manufacture at like 1/10 or 1/20th of the price in India with 2-3 manufacturers, and they started supplying to the African continent where the drug is most required. So one is Gilead. For them, they are able to monetize the patent in a larger scale. They know they won't get the same margin there, but when somebody is manufacturing at zero cost and you're getting kind of a royalty fee, so it is just a value addition for them or a direct addition for them into the profitability. So now many companies have started. When the sofosbuvir, which is a hepatitis C drug, was invented, within 3 months it has reached the Indian market. So there is a collaboration which is happening, and they give to the companies like India and they manufacture. One is India also get a lot of raw materials from China, which is much cheaper. And you have a human labor, even the topmost skilled labor also at a much lower price as compared to the developed market. So these two factored in a way much lower cost. And of course, it has nothing to do with the quality.
Thank you. I get it. Okay. I don't want to monopolize the question. We're doing overtime, by the way. I hope you don't mind. Are there any questions from the audience? I think you did a very thorough job. Thank you very much. And we will have copies of your presentation, and we will get in touch with you if you have more questions. Perhaps we're just starting about healthcare, really. Healthcare was never in the front burner until the pandemic. Now it has to become more and more dominating in our attention. So again, thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you to all you resource persons for giving us your valuable time and sharing your knowledge with us. On behalf of ACRAA, we would like to express our unending gratitude with the hope that we can call on you again some other time. So with this statement, I say let's look forward to our next webinar next month. And until then, keep safe, everybody. I adjourn this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Santi, and pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.